Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast, aptly named, right?
I love it.
And, of course, this is Boston Ward. No more. As you know him as Austin. It's just flat
just
Boston Ward.
Wow.
From now on, because we've got
Get back in person and not on Zoom, and all these things are changing.
You put enough messages down at the bottom of my podcast, and by golly, I react to them. So, Boston Ward it is, ladies and gentlemen. That's BOSSTIN, in case you're spelling it at home, because it can be difficult.
Won't that be more confusing? I don't want them to forget my real name.
Yeah. No, I think Boston Ward pretty much sums it up, because you are the boss. Just ask Will Crawl. But I digress. Bottom line is, I've got an interesting podcast today, Boston, because before I got here, I actually had a coat on and did a little Zoom sit down with Gene Smith, the athletic director at Ohio State since 2005, going on his 21st season at Ohio State as the athletic director, and touched on a little bit of what was going on with the football team the first week back, because I told him, obligatory, I've got to ask those questions. But then we moved into what I really want to talk to him about he's had his own, what I call an affirmative action program going on since he became an athletic director way back when, 1986, at Eastern Michigan, to Iowa State, to Arizona State, and then finally to The Ohio State University, where he's about as long-lived an athletic director almost as they've ever had, and or at least in modern times for sure. And I just wanted to get his take on things. Obviously, him being an African American, his mom grew up in the South. We talked about that. He brings up the fact that he and Sheila are a mixed race marriage, if that's what you want to call it. Really, it's modern day. If you look around the world now, it's
a marriage. It's two humans.
It's a marriage, but just the sort of the challenges he's had in his career, but how he's always sort of dragged a ladder behind him, and the ladder is helping other people climb that ladder.
Right.
And I thought it was a very interesting interview, one of the rare times you get to sit down and just one-on-one with Gene Smith. So without further ado, let's get to my interview with Gene Smith, the athletic director at Ohio State.
And as promised, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back with Gene Smith, the athletic director at Ohio State since 2005, Gene? Do I have that year correct?
That's right, Tim. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, man. I appreciate you coming on my podcast. And before we jump into what I really want to talk to you about, give folks an update on where football stands in your mind. I mean, the football players all got to return to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center 9 at a time starting last week. And, just people out there are feeling, I think, a little more confident that there's going to be a football season. But what is the status as we sit here this week?
Yeah, I think we have some confidence that it can happen. We still have to get feedback from our medical experts on what that would look like for the players on a weekly basis and then in and around the game. Yeah. So we're just really beginning that conversations with our medical experts. I think the fan part we can figure out. It will be significantly different. I mean, really different for our fans as they park and enter the stadium and sit and watch the game. There'll be a lot of requirements around that, but I think our fans could handle it. But I think that there's a chance, as athletic directors, we really have shifted, particularly last week, to start talking about that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving us that update because, as you know, folks are pretty fired up about this being a great football team, et cetera, but will there be a season to play? Yeah. But let's just jump right into it. I mean, in my opinion, the COVID-19 pandemic situation has been at least joined by what's been going on in this country, the racial unrest, et cetera. And you just I don't know, in your gut, are you a little hurt by what you've seen over the last several months? I mean, you're an African American who has risen to one of the highest spots you can rise to in college athletics, basically in athletics in this country and stuff. And did you think some of this was past us, or did you know this was still bubbling there?
Well, I've always known it was still bubbling. It was just a matter of time for it to be exposed like it is today, and for people to have the reactions that they're having. As you know, Tim, and you go back as well, and this goes back deep into our history. It's so 400 years of racism and discrimination, and that's obviously changed over the years, but at the end of the day, they still exist. And so how do we get away from this hatred and get to a level of respect in our society? And a lot of it's structural. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to change. And so it's always been there. I just frankly have a little more hope now that there's something might happen, but it's always been there.
Yeah, it's people talk about steps at a time, but we've been taking these steps. I had Larry James, Larry James, I had him on with me last week. We ironically, we both grew up in the same small town in Alabama, Demopolis, Alabama, and I was saying 50, 55 years ago, a lot of these same things we were dealing with. And he thinks really society has come a long way since then, but you still, that last 10% is maybe the hardest. And the reason I wanted you on, obviously your mom was born and raised in the South and moved to the Cleveland area. Just give us a little background on your family and how, you kind of dealt with it.
Yeah, my dad was born in Indiana. He's raised in Kentucky, and my mom was born and raised in Hawthorne, Florida, a small town outside of Gainesville in Florida. And she had 8 brothers and sisters, and it was a little shack. And some of their birthdays are remembered based upon when a pig was born or somebody was hanged. And so she grew up in the toughest part. And she taught us, so many different things and told us so many different stories. And so she had a little bit harder life than my dad from that perspective. My dad faced it in the Navy. He was a Navy electrician. And in fact, he wasn't recognized for his hard work in service of our country, frankly, until President Clinton came into the White House, and he ultimately bestowed some medals on my dad. Because he was one of the first African-American electricians. And so, it was, they had many stories I used to sit around and listen to and learn a lot from. And but I was blessed to have 2 great parents and have them share their experience as well, which also gave me perspective on life.
How much did you experience growing up in the Cleveland area of understanding your place, even up north? I mean, if you understand what I'm saying, There's an African American. When did it first become obvious to you that there was a bias out there?
Yeah, my dad was an electrician. He was a general contractor, and so I worked with him from the time I was 5 on, and every now and then we'd be somewhere doing some work in a building or something of that nature, and I would encounter it, I would see it, and not necessarily with me, but with some of the plumbers or masonry guys I was working with, but really it was in high school. My dad made a decision that I was no longer going to go to public school. I was going to go to Chanel High School in Bedford, so I bused out there, and I was one of the only 3 black people in that school.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, Tim, this is the early 70s, right after the civil rights movements, and hippies were still alive, and all that, and so it was a different type of gangs then, and so I faced it big time then, but I also learned the other side of it, because there's a lot of people that I met who were very respectful and actually curious, and so I learned a lot there. Faced it big time there, and a little bit when I went to Notre Dame, but not as much as in high school.
Did you feel, though, from that moment on, did you feel a little bit like a pioneer in the sense of you were blazing some trails, whether you even knew it at the time or not?
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time, but I was blazing trails. And interestingly, after I left college, and I was actually inducted into my high school Hall of Fame, and I went back for it, and I was like amazed at the number of black kids who were at Chanel at that time.
Yeah, I
was like, wow, that's when it hit me. To your point, that I did open some doors, and I've always felt that that was my blessing and opportunity in everything that I've done. To be quite honest, what I learned at Chanel, what I was able to do at Chanel. And try and help those opportunities become realistic. And then when I went into coaching, I was a coach at the age of 21 at Notre Dame, and one of a few black coaches, and then obviously from there. So I look back on it and felt fortunate that I had the opportunity, and that's why my dad always taught me just do things the right way. And I always knew that if I didn't do things the right way, I might be burning a bridge for somebody.
I was going to say, what has stood out to me, though, about your background is when there was an opportunity, it looked like to do this, to move up, so to speak. I'm talking about you took it. I mean, probably maybe sometimes with little butterflies in your stomach, but, to go to Notre Dame, to take that coaching job, then to get into athletic administration, become a young athletic director in 1986, right, at Eastern Michigan. I mean, how many butterflies were involved there? But how much did you know that you were slowly but surely living the American dream, so to speak?
Yeah, it's the whole time. From the time I actually graduated from Notre Dame and had the opportunity to coach there for 4 years, and then when I went to work at IBM in the early '80s, when basically no one had computers, and I was there was only 2 African Americans in my office at IBM at that particular time, and probably around 50-something people. But then, going to Eastern Michigan, and frankly, the biggest one, I had butterflies along the way all the time. But really the biggest one was going to Iowa State. When you look at the state of Iowa back then in 1993, when you look at, the 2 million people in that state, a town of 25,000, not a whole lot looks like me. And I was single at the time. I'd been divorced. I was single. And then ultimately Sheila came into my life and moved there with me. So we were an interracial couple in Ames, Iowa.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of firsts and a lot of experiences, and but I grew. Those 7 years there, I learned a lot and grew as a person.
You just brought it up with you and Sheila. Did you learn to become deaf, or did you learn to, if someone questioned you or your situation, to confront them straightforward? How did you approach that when people, because people do weird things?
Yeah, I always rose above it, Tim. I look back at some of my experiences, and I wish I challenged some, particularly with some of the police that stopped me along the way. As I got older, I wish I had challenged them. But then the other piece was, I was just always take the high road and try and do things that was right. And, I just internalized it. And I remember, the old Division 1A Athletic Directors Association that existed with Dutch Bachman. And I remember going to a meeting, and one of the athletic directors there, who clearly didn't want me in the room, and I remember him talking to another group that I could hear, and he said, "What is he doing here?" And you can either react to it or just move on. And I just moved on, because I wasn't about trying to change that old man's thought process.
Yeah.
So, and then there was many more who embraced me. So in all those situations, I just rose above it.
I was going to say, you were the odd man in the room for a long time,
Oh yeah.
That's, no matter who you are, no matter what your situation is, that's an interesting situation. Who is the 1 or 2 people that really reached down or reached across and pulled you up, so to speak, Gene, as you look back on your career?
I'd have to give a lot of recognition to Mike Cleary, who, God bless him, passed away. He's executive director of NACTA, our National Association. He put me on committees right away. He was a Notre Dame fan too, and their office is in Cleveland, so we had some connections. But he embraced me right away. I was on NACTA committees, which put me in the room with a lot of the outstanding ADs. Then there was Sed Dempsey, who was the athletic director at Arizona, became the president of the NCAA. He became a big mentor of mine. And then DeLoss Dodds, who was the athletic director of Texas. Yeah, those 3 guys, I would have to say, they were very supportive of me from the very beginning. I said, and Mike Cleary put me on committees that made no sense. Now, part of it is they wanted diversity in the room, but part of it was providing me an opportunity to get experience. And DeLoss, man, I learned so much from him, and he would come into meetings, and I may be at a table or at a desk, and he would come and sit next to me, and his colleagues and people he was in the business with were sitting up front or sitting somewhere else, he would come sit next to me. And we'd have great conversations. So those three I probably would give a lot of credit to.
Yeah, I just got goosebumps as you're talking about that, because I remember talking to you in DeLoss in the back of the press box in Texas in 2006 when Ohio State played at Texas. And I walked up there because I was wanting to know why you guys, didn't think of the idea of maybe prorating ticket prices or putting tickets on eBay, because you know what the tickets went for that night. But the thing, what struck me was, though, I'm talking to probably the two most maybe not powerful, I don't know what you call it, but the heads of the two most prolific sports programs, athletic departments in the country, and it was you and DeLoss Dodge. That probably still gives you a little bit of goosebumps, doesn't it?
It does. Every time I talk about those guys, I get goosebumps. And, the experience that I've had with him, that one, and many others, he and I was at Iowa State. We were in the Big 8. And I was on the committee to help move from the Big 8 to the Big 12. Yeah. And DeLoss was at Texas, obviously, at that time. And being in the room with him and negotiating those deals. And he was part of the original CBS contract negotiations for the basketball tournament, being in the room with him. And it was just great experiences. And he was phenomenal. Okay. This,
when you and I were conversing about this before, I got you to come on my podcast. I told you one of the things I wanted to bring up was the fact that you didn't just go your own way, but you brought people with you. I mean, Pat Shun is the athletic director of Washington State, an Asian American. Martin Germond went from Boston College now to UCLA, an African American who's now the athletic director at UCLA. Heather Like was at Ohio State, I think, when you came along, but you promoted her and brought her along and she went from, I think, Eastern Michigan, ironically, to Pittsburgh, where she is the athletic director. Did you have it in your mind that you were going to not just be who you were, but bring people along with you if, in fact, they were deserving to be brought along? Just give me your mindset.
Yeah, I did, Tim, and it was intentional. And back in the day, we had a pipeline. When I was at Arizona State, we used to have these meetings, and we called them the pipeline of young, up-and-coming African-American males who aspired to be athletic directors. And you tried to give them some guidance and experiences along the way. And then when I got to Ohio State, Heather was our compliance officer, and Pat was in our external affairs, and I began a little group called the Group of Six, and there were people who wanted to be athletic directors, and Ben Jay was a part of that. And so after I hired him from the Pac-12, and so just tried to give them experiences, sent them down actually to North Carolina, and they visited Kevin White at Duke, Debbie Yao was at North Carolina State, and Ron Wellman at Wake Forest, because all those schools were there. So I think they stayed 3 days and toured those schools, met with those ADs. I brought Joe Castiglione to our campus for a day to visit with them, and just had a lot of programming just to get them ready. And I've always felt that was an opportunity that I have. And then there's obviously a number of young puppies across the country that I've mentored who some are now ADs that weren't necessarily a part of my shop, but that's an important part for someone like me to do.
Well, I mean, even Diana Sabo now, I think, is your right-hand person, or one of your right-hand people. Right. And it's not, like I said, it wasn't just minorities; it was females also. Was it because of your background? But was it because of your upbringing? Was it because of discussions with your mom way back when? What just inspired you to be that fellow?
Yeah, it's my parents first and foremost, and it's about helping others and respect and providing opportunities. And then obviously my career path along the way. I had people do that for me, and I wanted to make sure I built that into what I do. Women in particular, people don't know this. Sheila was a senior associate athletic director at UNLV when we met. She was on a track to become an athletic director. She chose to sacrifice that and come with me. And so I've had an appreciation for why women should be in a leadership position for a long time. We needed to do better with that. So when you have a chance to help someone like Heather be in that seat, or Diana down the road, and I want to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife was one of the early scholarship athletes at Ohio State. She was a high jumper and a little bit of a sprinter and stuff way back in the '70s. And it's just amazing how far it's come. As you look, Gene, how far has that realm of things come in the sense of leadership? Is it real, or is it still, for want of another term, affirmative action going on? I mean, do you get a sense that it's real?
Yeah, I do. I think it's real. It's gotten so much better from the people who are making hiring decisions. It's interesting. When Martin was hired at UCLA, I knew all the last 4 candidates, and it was a very diverse pool. When Heather was hired at Pittsburgh, I knew the last 3 candidates, a very diverse pool. And it takes leadership to make that commitment that you're going to put people of color or put women in a leadership position. And so I've seen it change. I think there's 9 black athletic directors in the FBS right now. And while that's not the progress that I would like to see, because used to be me and Charles Harris back in 1986. He was at Arizona State. Then McKinley Boston came online at Rhode Island. But the reality is, there's improvement. I have hope. When I give speeches at our national convention now and I look out in the audience, I see the diversity. I see it. And so it's in every unit of athletic administration. So the pipeline is strong. And I think leadership is doing a better job.
You have not stood not only have you not stood in the way, but you've encouraged the athletes at Ohio State to take thought out stances in this time. The worst thing you can do, I think, in a situation like this is just be quiet. I think Martin Luther King Jr. said that better than anybody. No matter what your thoughts are, let people know about them. That is different from when you were a player way back when, isn't it? In college, I mean, I think white and black, you were encouraged to keep your mouth shut, right? I mean, but now,
you weren't encouraged then; you were told.
Yeah, you were told, exactly. There's a big difference, But do you see? I don't know. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about this, about people using their voice for good, for change, and you see the athletes doing it. What does that do for you as an elder statesman now, as an athletic director who's sort of paved the way?
Well, it's refreshing, when you know that your student athletes can express their thoughts and their feelings on a platform, and our job is to educate them and help make sure that what they're doing is clear, that it makes sense, that it's delivered the right way, and understand the repercussions, because there will be. Yeah. And so so we just have to give them that education and get out of the way. It's a beautiful thing for me. Like you and I were back in the day, we were told just swallow it, move on. But today it's really a blessing to see, particularly because we have some mature, educated athletes. When you think about them. And Seth Towns never played for a dime for us yet, but he's a smart young man in his own hometown and has thoughts and feelings, and I think he's doing it the right way. So it's refreshing to me. I'm glad I have an opportunity to be a part of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've been around Jordan Fuller. You remember, Wyatt Davis, some of these guys are just really, they're intelligent guys, it's funny, your background's like mine to a certain extent, but the opposite. I mean, I remember back in Lufkin, Texas, we moved from Demopolis, Alabama to Lufkin, Texas, and I was part of a pilot program where I took my driver's education at Lufkin Dunbar High School. Even though Lufkin high school was integrated, they still had 2 high schools. And then I was there when we totally integrated. And it's just amazing, just 2 steps here, how much the scenery changes if you follow my drift of opening your eyes to things and stuff. Hey, last thing, what do you expect to come from this now? Like when I had Larry James on last week, we talked about this is another major step, because this has enlightened people to the fact that, yes, this still is a major divide in this country in some respects. Do you expect this next 10 years to take us over the hump in that regard?
I hope so. I'm not a person that believes you're going to eliminate racism and hate. I think you're going to significantly reduce it. And I really do. Now, I think some structural things have to happen. We have a code in silence in our police force, just like we have that in a lot of our cultures and organizations where people don't want to snitch. But we have to create an environment where there is self-policing, in that environment. We have to create a way where the accused person and the accuser are heard. And those people who have a history of abuse in their jobs can be dealt with. I mean, they have some unbelievable protections in the police force where the mayor or city council or even the police chief can't deal with people who have behavioral problems after they're hired. We need to find a way to fix that. So there's just a number of different structural things we need to do. We need to fix the economic imbalance. Columbus has some challenges relative to the economic disparity between whites and blacks. And how do we solve that? How do we mitigate that? So I think there's some things structurally we have to do. But I think the conversation is so important, Tim. What you're doing and all the other media people are doing, providing that voice, I think it's got to be talked about more and more and more.
The Real Life Wednesdays that Urban Meyer started at Ohio State just were eye-opening to me, just because they weren't about anything about football, et cetera.
Right.
Y'all have had other programs now that have blossomed sort of from that, and I don't know, how good do you feel about the track y'all are on just specifically at Ohio State in that regard?
Yeah, we have what we call a Buckeye Inclusion Committee. It started years ago, and it was more at that particular time around sexual orientation. And I think you remember our hockey team wanted to do, if you can play, you can play. And there's been a number of initiatives from there, mental health and just a number of different things that they've been responsible for. And this is one that will be heightened this year. And so making sure that we continue to develop our athletes the right way and keep the issues in front of them is something that we always do.
Gene Smith, these are interesting times, man. It never changes, right? There's always something coming around the corner, right, when you're an athletic director.
That's true, Tim. I appreciate your hard work, man.
Hey, thank you for coming on, my man. I owe you. I owe you lunch. Let's do it. Let's do it. When we get out of COVID-19 quarantine, we'll have lunch. I appreciate it, Gene.
All right, buddy. Take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you.
Boston, as I said, Gene's had a very interesting career.
Yeah, and you've known him, 10 years longer than I have.
Hey, man, I chased the car when he was getting interviewed out at the out east of Newark, his final interview before he got the job. I mean, it was a big-time hire when they got him back in 2005.
He's I was just going to say, I've known him long enough to have a pretty good relationship and respect for what he does. And you brought it up in the interview, that the trail that he's blazed and brought along so many others, it's really impressive what Gene Smith has done. And he and I do not agree on every decision that he's ever made. And if you're critical of him, he doesn't hold a grudge forever, and he'll talk it out and respect your opinion in return.
Let me hold up my hand, because I don't want to interrupt you. People get upset when I interrupt you, so I'm just holding my hand.
Just stop paying attention to that, Tim. We're going to have our show.
The one thing I was going to bring up to him that I forgot, because you get kind of wrapped up in things, is there are two people who are always going to be booed whenever they're introduced. They are athletic directors and commissioners. Why do you think that is, by the way?
Well, misplaced anger for one.
Yes.
But because they're making the decisions, and they're easier to blame because they're not on the field.
Right.
And they're easier to second guess because that's a job that you and I could more realistically do. From our seat.
Theoretically.
We probably, couldn't, because you think that it's always about, football, and the ones that come to my mind with him are, I thought that Thad Matta, that lasted too long, that Gene needed to make a move for basketball, that the decision they made to not take the bowl ban in 2011, I thought was the wrong one at the time, and that it could have saved 2012. But, we're looking at 2 or 3 major decisions that impact football and basketball, and he's in charge of 34, 35 other sports for an athletic department that has a $220 million budget every year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard deal. Very few people in the country have a more difficult job and more pressure. He's trying to organize workouts in COVID and all these protests that are going on and supporting for Black Lives Matter. And that's just a fraction of the deal, because he's got to hire and fire coaches for every sport that's under the umbrella over down the street here. And for me, it's so that's why I say people that want to fire college presidents or fire athletic directors or commissioners because of one bad decision. Well, he's also made 999 other ones right before the one that I take exception with, which is the one team that I cover. Could other places make a firing over that? Sure.
No,
but,
wait a minute. You were talking about the Thad Matta?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you also cover Ohio State football, and I think a lot of people are going, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Well, what are you talking about here?
Yeah.
But yeah.
I don't mean to disrupt it.
Here's the thing, though, man. Think about it.
But that's what I mean. There's only been so few things.
Thad Matta went to the Final Four. Thad Matta got some things done when he was there. Sometimes you give people the benefit of the doubt when they for sure they're going through some tough times on and off the court, and I think he did that with that. I think he did maybe extend it a little bit longer than maybe he should have, because Thad just physically almost couldn't do the job anymore, especially when it came to recruiting. But I'm not defending it. I'm just saying sometimes when people have taken you places, you ride along with them for a little while longer.
And that's also why they're so hard. Those decisions are so hard, and they have different information, obviously, than I do. Because if we're looking at 2011, and you were intimately involved in covering everything that went into that decision, Gene Smith did not think that punishment would include a bowl ban, which is why they didn't take one in 11. And I get that. In hindsight, and to me, because I was looking at it from the outside, I thought there's no way that Ohio State will not get one. But that's, again, we're quibbling over 2 or 3 things, and maybe 1 year of basketball or 2 years, which, again, that's also not my expertise, because as you said and reminded everybody, I'm the football guy. And throughout my tenure, and that was at ESPN, they were telling me not to cover basketball.
As it turned out, too, in 2011, I mean, the actual penal part of the situation, they were considering giving Ohio State a 2-year bowl ban. It changed it to 1.
Yeah.
Whereas all the experts I ever spoke to during that time, including Gene Marsh, a guy who had been involved on that committee, but also helped defend people on afterwards, a lot of people were stunned that Ohio State got a one game bowl ban, but that was the wrong time in NCAA history to be doing to have a few digressions from the rules. And as it's turned out, like I had with Larry James, I had him on last week. Turns out, in a year or two, almost everything they got found out for will be legal in the NCAA eyes. So
I know that wasn't what you wanted to talk about, but my long-winded, rambling digression point was that Gene Smith has done really a remarkable job in his role, and it goes well beyond what he's done purely with athletics at Ohio State. He is, and you see this when he's on the NCAA committee for selection committee for basketball, when he was on the college football playoff committee. He is one of the most respected administrators, athletic directors in the entire country, and some of that comes just by being the Ohio State AD, but really when you mention all the places that he's gone and building his career, he is just as widely respected as it gets in this profession, and he's not somebody that you'd think would be ever booed if they step foot on the turf out there waving to the crowd at the Horseshoe.
You know what's funny about that car that just went by is we're sitting out here on the Roosters patio, and it had glass packs, basically. That's my euphemism for enhanced exhaust package. And I guarantee you I could outrun that car myself. That shows you how bad that car is, but at least it sounds, in that man's mind, really good.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, let's move on, though. One of the things I brought with to begin with is, with Gene, was, how far has the football team come in a week? Mm-hmm. And basically they're still getting their feet on the ground as far as how they're covering, how they're handling the reopening of the Wood Hayes Athletic Center. 9 players at a time, plus 1 fellow from the Mickey Marotti staff working with players. As you documented last week, you were out there when they first opened it, guys going in shifts, etc. You don't have these big congregation of players yet. And I said, are you looking more and more confident like there's going to be a football season? And I'm just paraphrasing him now, but here's the point. The point right now is they're just trying to find out around the country where they can even have these kind of workouts yet, and on a safe basis. And that's what they're probing right now. The season, like Gene said to us several weeks ago, the idea on the season, you're going to have to start getting questions about that answered maybe middle of July. The NCAA, of course, came out with this 6-week plan, which is what I'd come out with a long time ago.
It's called the Tim May plan.
Yeah. I don't know why they didn't call it that, but I would probably have to get some trademark rights or copyrights from it. But I digress. The bottom line is that was no surprise. That's what you have to lead into a season. It's not going to be a 6-week full preseason camp. You know, people, looked at the 6 weeks and thought that was going to be. No, it's not that. It's going to be just a gradual step up to probably, in essence, a 3-week preseason camp when it gets right down to it, 3.5 weeks. But they're still in the toddler years of seeing whether they can actually even have workouts.
And you're already seeing, that signs that not everyone is out of the woods. Houston, the University of Houston had to put a halt to their voluntary workouts after they had, several positive tests. We talked about it a week or two ago that Alabama and Oklahoma State had already publicly released or had reported that they had positive tests on their campus. And now you've got, NFL starting to go back to work, and there were reports that Ezekiel Elliott had tested positive for coronavirus, which would be another big glowing sign. Remember, the NBA is kind of what kicked this off. Like, if there are positive tests there, like, we need to stop all of this. At least that's when more people started recognizing the threat that we were under in March. So if you're, and I keep saying this, like, if you're going to have 22 guys on the field, 85 scholarship players, and have a football game, the fact that you're at 9 is just that first, as you were saying, to use your analogy, that's crawling. Then you're going to have to get up a little bit and start stumbling around it. Are you going to have more tests when you have, 22 guys in a workout before you get to 85, and then putting on pads and playing full games? There is still a long way to go, and really not that long of a period of time. And there is this impression, I think, to people, okay, well, they're back and they have voluntary workouts. They're going to get their 8 hours, and they're going to have that training camp plan. Everything is on schedule, and it's going to be like normal. What's not? I still think there's an extremely high likelihood that there will be changes to the schedule and setbacks that we're still, I've talked about this plan of Big Ten only, and maybe 10 games. There's traction for that. Multiple people that I've talked to continue to believe that that's where this is heading. Mm-hmm. It's still not going to be a normal season one way or the other. Gene said it on your podcast that you have to prepare for massive changes if you're a fan that wants to be at a game, and I think that there will still be others that have to be made in terms of the schedule. Mm-hmm. This thing is not on a full speed ahead back to a normal season. Yeah,
this is a SpaceX launching back into space. This is testing the rocket engine to see if it even works. Mm-hmm. That's a bad analogy, but you know where I'm going with that. Yeah, I mean, when I wrote that story, like, what was that, 2-3 months ago?
Yeah.
I anticipated eventually that I think there was a better chance than not that it was going to be all conference schedules, intra-conference scheduling, because that's the best way to ensure if people are getting the job done the right way. You've been to familiar hotels. You know what they're capable of. You've been to locker rooms there. You know whether they're feasible as far as having them sanitary, et cetera. So there's all kinds of things. And we just saw this past week, I think Oregon had a little bit of a bump or spike or whatever you want to call it in its COVID-19 cases. I was down in Texas visiting my mom for the first time in 2 months when my brother and I were allowed to visit her because she's in a tough situation now. And but then again, I went down and had dinner with my brother and his family in Houston. And as soon as I left there, there's a big reports that Houston especially has had this big jump. So maybe you're sitting a little too close to me right now. We're 5.5 feet instead of 6, but you don't know. This is the unknown. It's what you're dealing with right now. Is you've got to let this thing play itself out to see who does have it and who doesn't have it, and where's it going to go from there. Because the grand reopening was, I think, premature. I mean, in a lot of respects, but people were so pushing for it, and then of course you pile on top of that, and I mean pile on, the riots and the marches and the protests that took place after the George Floyd killing, by a Minneapolis policeman, and just the things that have happened since then that have just thrown gasoline on that fire. It's the timing is like ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to get a feel for when everything is going to, or should be, or could be fully reopened. And there was this sense, maybe right before the riots, which that's a whole nother matter that's complicated things. And I think I don't know if all the data's in or what's going to happen with positive cases from that. I hate to even think about it in those terms because what they're protesting is so important, and I fully support their ability to do so. And we've talked about that a number of times on our shows here, but I think that's another part of it that's going to impact just purely from our world in college football. If there are more tests and more positive tests and these numbers keep going up like what just happened at Houston, then you're going to have problems. It's not a situation that everything is magically done.
Right.
And the schedule, they're going to play on September 5th in the Horseshoe, and 100,000 people are going to be there. That's just not the situation.
Like we've talked about on the show many times, until they get the vaccine, where you can go get a vaccine and be pretty assured you're not going to get it, no one can really rest easy in this situation. And being foolish now is the worst thing you can do from a social distancing standpoint, and not wearing a mask in public, at least when you're in stores and things like that. That's not asking very much of a person. Hey, moving past that real quick before we go, we talk about different position groups on the football team. As you look at it right now and you're pondering, what is that one position where you're not sure about whether, the chain link there is going to be sufficient going into this season, going into preseason camp? Is there one on this team that's not troubling you because you're not coaching?
I'm not troubled.
Yeah. But is concerning.
I think, the two that we talked about before spring camp, is the running back situation going to be okay? And then what about the secondary? And I honestly didn't ever have any real concern about the secondary.
Yeah.
Maybe I was in the minority there, but I've been you and I have talked about these guys for a long time, but I am a big Cameron Brown guy, and Berm goes to bat and says Seven Banks is going to be an NFL draft pick at this time next year, and I don't disagree. That we saw him walk in last Monday, Tim, and he looked like he had added 20 more pounds. We saw him on the first day of spring in March. He looks even bigger than that, and that dude I think has a chance to be a real stud. And we've beaten the drum a bunch of times on this show for Josh Proctor. They're going to be fine at safety. I really truly believe that. So I don't have concerns about it. And then you see Trey Sermon walk in, and he is everything you could possibly want physically. And I've watched –
We're talking about running back Trey Sermon.
Running back. Yeah. Watching him, what he did just starting as a freshman in that game against Ohio State, and then what he's done before he got hurt for Oklahoma last year. You put him in this offense, that's scary. I don't think that there is a weak position. Yeah. Marcus Crowley being healthy, you can still have some uncertainty with guys that aren't experienced. And, yes, Trey Sermon is new to that unit. But, those are the two that everyone will hold up across the country and say, well, do they have that? Is that a national title because of these two positions? They do have to prove that when they get on the field. But if it's me and if I'm Ryan Day trying to go to sleep, I'm not worried about either position.
Yeah.
I think that they're going to be fine top to bottom.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, we saw Jeffrey Okudah grow, but he wasn't instantly what he was last year. So those guys are going to have their growing pains in the secondary.
Yeah.
Because, every day, every play, it's a different thing. But we've seen Cam play. He played in the Big Ten championship game. He played in the college football playoff game. They've gotten their taste under fire. Seven Banks same way. The running back thing, we saw Marcus Crowley was coming on big time.
Man.
And if Marcus Crowley, if he comes back, Trey Sermon's, he's coming back from a knee injury, but he looks 100% based on everything I've heard about him. And if Marcus Crowley's back 100%, that gives them the luxury, as we talked about earlier, of letting Master Teague III
take his time,
not have to be there on opening day as the featured back. And so you're right. I think this team by the middle of the year is going to look so much stronger, kind of like what we talked about last year, than it does at the beginning because of those very things.
Here's what I think. I've kicked this around in my brain. We just had running backs week last week at Lettermen Row and talked about Crowley, and it was hard because, that the way he was running against Maryland, you could see the confidence. And I had talked to Tony Alford before, he's like, this guy was not recruited at a high enough level. Being the state, Florida Gatorade Player of the Year, They don't just hand that out down there. You beat out a bunch of dudes for that honor. They were thrilled to sign this guy. And the way he worked.
That whole dynamic, the way they got him was crazy because they lost a guy, and then they were more excited about the guy they got late. Go ahead.
And you could see the fact he was starting to push more. And what he did in the Maryland game, he had a lot more of the all-around, sort of elusiveness out in open space that looked more like J.K.
Yeah.
And that was missing when Master Teague was at the end of the year. He sort of hit that wall. It's just crazy to think in your mind, like, They pulled the red shirt off Marcus Crowley. He has 88 yards or whatever it is against Maryland. You're still building for the home stretch. If Master Teague wasn't the only option in tailback against Clemson, how does that look? I mean, do you have to rush J.K. Dobbins back, to play through the foot injury? And I'm not saying that Marcus Crowley could have been J.K. Dobbins in that game, but he would have given another option because Teague he didn't get a carry at all in the Big Ten championship game. Spencer Holbrook and I had been looking at those numbers for the last 5 weeks. I think it was 31 carries for 90 yards. He wasn't giving them, 45 came against Rutgers. He wasn't at that same level that he was early in the year.
Right.
He would have at least had another option with Marcus Crowley while he was on the rise and not, still going to have some true freshman stuff that we talked about with Banks and
but
others.
You could see it just coming on in Marcus Crowley. I mean, I was down on the field by the time he got hurt in that game, and just the moves he was making. That's a guy who's feeling confident not only about the blocking in front of him, but about what he was seeing and where he was playing, and just kind of letting it loose. Slowly but surely, you have to, they let it loose, and that's where the great ones really step up. And, Master Teague III, same way. I mean, there's a huge difference between when you get to play a pretty good bit and then you become the guy, and you've got those you've got that experience behind you. I really expect him, once he gets back this year, to be a different back than he was even last year. But he was quite effective when they needed him during some of those really grinded out games.
Yeah, I think that's the part of it too. Like, I asked Beanie Wells about that. Like, if we're talking about these yards, it sounds like a criticism, and in some ways it is, but it's also just pointing to, hey, this is the part where you grow. When Beanie went out there, he wasn't a finished product as a freshman his first year, and I know that Master Teague was a redshirt freshman, so he'd been through the program, but you have to have some setbacks before you're going to grow, and Ryan Day calls it that, growth and learning through failure.
Right.
He had moments where he wasn't ready to be the primary tailback. Okay, it's unfortunate you didn't get the spring, you got hurt, and now you have to go through rehab, but all that experience, those reps, knowing what it was like to come up short, what it'll take to get to the next level, he's going to learn from all that. And sometimes I think, like, is Teague not getting enough credit? Am I being too hard on Master Teague? I can't figure out where the ceiling is for him, because I am a huge Trey Sermon guy, and that's clear. I think he's going to be the starter, but what does this mean for Master Teague moving forward? And he gets to define that when he gets healthy.
But here's the thing. You know more about Master Teague than you know about Trey Sermon.
Right.
Because you watched him play. You watched him develop. And the thing about it is about experience is it teaches you what you don't know more than anything else. It teaches you if you're a yearning running back, it teaches you, well, that worked against Indiana. That's not going to work against Michigan. That's not going to work. I found that doesn't work against Clemson. You know what I mean? Those little lessons you learn as you grow, and then you develop these other skills, these other parts of your game. And that's where I think, they don't need to push him back if, in fact, Trey Sermon's ready to go and Marcus Crowley are ready to go. But I think Master Teague's going to come back in the middle of the year and could be quite the force exactly when they need him.
And it's also another reminder of what I just said about the Fiesta Bowl. You want to have as many options as possible.
Oh, yeah.
And if that's one you get back, a guy who's got almost 800 yards running in the Big Ten, you can do a lot worse than that.
I'll tell you what, though, I just rewatched again that when Jeffrey Okudah ripped the ball.
No.
I'm telling you, man, that's stunning. It is stunning how egregious that replay reversal was.
We don't need 30 more minutes on
No,
this
we don't.
podcast.
But I just kept looking at I saw it the other day, and I just go, man, has anybody ever gotten a real true explanation?
No.
Other than the mamby-pamby, and why did it go to that kind of explanation in the first place? I mean, Ohio State fans, there are things you can live with and things that you never, will accept, and that will be one of them for sure. But you know what? Maybe we'll come back and talk about that more next week, Austin.
Good. I never get tired of talking about officiating.
If I don't have another big-time guest on, I plan on having a few big-time guests on as we keep going here. I really appreciate Gene Smith for coming on my podcast. Really interesting, enlightening conversation with a fellow who started out in basically Cleveland, working with his dad, experiencing some essences of racism, et cetera, as a youngster growing up, going to Notre Dame, pulling himself up by his bootstraps to a certain extent, but also having other people help him along the way to become the athletic director, basically the most powerful athletic department in the country from the terms of width and breadth.
Yep.
That's probably the same things, width and breadth, but just from how far he's come, and also his power just nationally in the athletic director ranks. I mean, it was a very enlightening interview.
Yep.
But anyway, until next week, this is Tim May for Boston Ward. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and you know we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.